Hey everyone, it's the Kung Fu Genius, aka Alex Richter. If you're listening to us on audio only, I'd appreciate you reviewing and rating the podcast wherever you listen to it. And if you're watching us on YouTube, of course, if you like what I do here, don't forget to subscribe to the Kung Fu Genius and hit that bell for notifications. I have an announcement for Kung Fu Genius fans. Right now, for a limited time, you can get a 1-month all-access trial subscription to Wing Chun Illustrated Magazine absolutely free. No strings attached after that free month either. Go to WCInewsstand.com to register in the upper right corner. Fill in your email and password and use the code KFGTRIAL to get 1 month free access to all the issues published from 2011 to the current issue. How cool is that? All the issues. And if you want that information again, it's in the description below. And with that, let's get started.
All right, peeps, on today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be discussing his time training Wing Chun, not in Hong Kong, but in a castle in Germany. Lots of gems, lots of nonsense, lots of Fahrvergnügen. Let's get to it.
He is unstoppable, unbeatable, unbelievable. He's Alex Richter, the Kung Fu Genius.
And every day, I practice martial arts. Watch out!
Word is, I'm a Kung Fu genius. Practiced all day like a genius.
Yo, Dre, how you doing, man?
I'm good, Sifu.
Super excited
good.
about today. Today, our podcast is new.
Yes.
So we're trying out different types of content, kind of throwing out there, see what sticks.
Different content,
People
different
definitely
things.
like the Fight Quest episode, so I think we might do more stuff like that in the future. But today we're going to do something a little bit different from what we've done in the past. So we've done the Bruce Lee conversations, we've done some history, we've done an interview, and we did some salty, behind the scenes stuff of Fight Quest. Today I'm going to do something that if I'm honest, I don't actually really like doing this kind of topic because I don't like talking about myself as the main reason for the podcast. I prefer to talk about Kung Fu and history and, stories of things that I've done. But all right, on the next episode of Kung Fu Genius, the Kung Fu Genius is going to talk about himself, right? But this is actually a topic that many of our listeners, even from back in the Dudes of Kung Fu days, wanted me to do.
You gotta appease the fans.
Yes, so I'm gonna try it. I mean, for me, it's a kind of story, kind of stuff I would tell you, but it's not necessary. I don't know if this is really worthy of a podcast, but people really like it, and it's the story of my early training at the castle.
Yes.
Yeah, my origin story. How did I, because I'm mostly known as being a Hong Kong style practitioner of Sifu Leung Ting's Wing Chun. But my origins actually come from the European side of things, and people want to know, and I trained at a castle, and people want to know about that stuff. So they want to have stories from the castle. So I thought, okay, why don't I just do a Kung Fu Genius origin story?
Yeah.
And talk about this stuff, and then it's done, and then I never have to talk about it again. I can go
Get
back
it out
to
the
talk.
way.
Exactly.
All
Right?
right.
So I hope I can do it in a way that our fans will find interesting, and I do probably have to refrain from telling some stories to protect the innocent.
Yes. All right. Now, my question: I understand you got roots in Taekwondo. How did you eventually get into Wing Chun?
So the whole idea of me getting into Wing Chun was very organic. As I've told many times, my dad rented Enter the Dragon one day when I was homesick from school. And, at that point, I'd only seen, I think, The Karate Kid and maybe just some... I don't even think I've actually watched any other martial art movies before that. And then I saw Enter the Dragon, and it was just like, thing blew my mind.
Yeah.
And that's when I found out about Bruce Lee, which then started me on that whole path about wanting to find out about Bruce Lee and just being a huge Bruce Lee fan. And then shortly after that, I saw on World Northall Saturday Black Belt Theater presentation, Heroes of the East with Gordon Liu and Yasuaki Kurata, and that just made me fall in love with Kung Fu. The problem was, I grew up in, I guess you could call it Central Jersey.
Yeah.
And in Central Jersey, there were no Kung Fu schools. So
all the Taekwondo schools, right?
Yeah, you had Taekwondo, you had karate, like many places in the U.S., especially at that time. But even now, Kung Fu is always been kind of exotic and kind of not very accessible. And so there was really no way for me to learn Chinese Kung Fu. I didn't actually have the chance to start learning Wing Chun until I moved to Seattle, and then I started learning the non-classical Wing Chun styles over there.
Okay.
So that, most of my exposure to Kung Fu during the time that I was learning karate and taekwondo was from reading the magazines. I used to get Inside Kung Fu and Black Belt magazine.
Okay, right.
And I used to just read them cover to cover, just like a machine. I would read them over and over again. And I didn't know who half those people were, what their styles were, but I would read about it. And that's how I started to find out about Hong Ga and Charlie Fut and Wing Chun and Yip Man and all these kind of things. But these were just names of people that I was reading about.
10 years old, 11, what?
Yeah, started around 8 and then started reading the magazine shortly after that. And that, carried on pretty much through the rest of my life. So it wasn't until I was about 14, 15 years old that when I lived near Seattle, that I started learning Bruce Lee's non-classical Wing Chun, which then for me was amazing for a couple of things. One, it was the first time I was able to do a Kung Fu style.
Okay.
And two, that particular style of Kung Fu was an offshoot of what Bruce Lee was teaching in his early Seattle years. So this wasn't like traditional Wing Chun. This was like a Bruce Lee inspired variant of Wing Chun. And my teacher at that time, Sifu Johan, who I've interviewed before on the Kung Fu Genius channel and also through Dudes of Kung Fu, he taught a non-classical Wing Chun style called zhou Wing Chun. And that was based off of what his teacher had learned from James Demaio, who was one of Bruce Lee's early students from Seattle, and also with his training, and he also trained with Ed Hart, who was another student of Bruce Lee. So this was like a style that was like an amalgamation of those two styles, and then his teacher kind of streamlined his own methods, and there happened to be a brick and mortar school teaching this method in the town that I lived in.
A lot of sparring, I'm imagining.
Yeah, it was very practical, very straightforward. And for me, having had a background in Taekwondo, I was already a black belt at that time.
Yeah.
I liked the sparring and I liked the practicality of it, the getting close, the emphasis on the hands, because even though I had a black belt in Taekwondo, I had 0 hands, you know. I didn't really know much about punching or defending punches or anything like that. Wow. So it wasn't until, I go in there and I met Sifu Johan and he's showing me chain punches and this kind of aggressive strategy. I was like, wow, this is exactly what I felt was missing. And also the fact that they would address things like how people attack you on the street with, wild punches or headlocks and those kind of things. Whereas in my Taekwondo training, it was very sport based. So it was, we did some self-defense stuff, but obviously
all about the points,
yeah, but the emphasis was Taekwondo versus Taekwondo sparring. It wasn't that it was about the points. It was that the whole paradigm was you're always sparring against another Taekwondo person. Whereas when I started learning this non-classical Wing Chun style, now I'm like, it's not like just fighting other Wing Chun people. It's like, okay, someone can give you a hook, a swing, someone can try to tackle you, someone can try to kick you. So now I'm starting to address a lot of the things that I had questions about. Even as a black belt in Taekwondo, I still kind of doubted like, yeah, but if the guy puts me in a headlock, or if the guy tries to take me down, I wasn't like too sure that I had any skill sets for that. And this was the first time. And it happened to be a Kung Fu style, and it happened to come from Bruce Lee. So for me, this was like the perfect thing for me to start learning.
A whole new world.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I did that pretty intensely for about 3 years. I think from about 14 to about 18, was there all the time. And then I moved from Issaquah, which is the suburb that we lived in, which is where the school was, and I moved directly to Seattle. And I actually had the chance to train with my teacher's teacher, who the headquarters school was in Seattle proper, whereas I was training in Issaquah at the student's school, right? At Sifu Johan's school. And then his teacher was in Seattle. And so I actually had a job with BMW motorcycles, and my job was like right across the street from the school.
Wow.
So it was perfect.
Convenient city.
But then I started training there, and it wasn't the same. It was, I think I was maybe one of the first people to transfer from my first teacher's school to his teacher's school. And there was like a vibe going on. Like, you're the student of the student, and like he would be, he was kind of a hard ass, and I didn't have problems with that. My Taekwondo instructors were, they were Korean and they were hard asses, and so I was used to that. But there's a difference between someone is being a hard ass to you because they expect excellence, and or someone is being a hard ass to you because for some reason or another he just doesn't like you. And I don't know what it was. In fact, I told this story when I interviewed my first Sifu Johan. I had entered a sport jiu-jitsu tournament, and I was about, I guess, 18 at that time. So it was towards the tail end of me training with my first Sifu. And it was at James Demaio's school, James Demaio being one of Bruce Lee's early students.
Right.
At that time, it was the late 90s. And like because of UFC and stuff like that, jiu-jitsu and grappling, this was starting to become a big thing in the, kind of took the martial arts industry by storm. The fact that, you need to also learn how to grapple or at least be able to defend it. So James Demaio hosted a sport jiu-jitsu tournament at his school. Now, it's not sport jiu-jitsu like modern Brazilian jiu-jitsu, like a grappling tournament. Mm-hmm. It was actually kind of a hybrid thing where it was like kicking and punching, and you could throw and you could also go on the ground. So it wasn't mixed martial arts by any stretch. I mean, well, it was mixed in that you were doing all these things, but, there were rules, and it was almost like kind of... it was like kickboxing, but you were allowed to throw and grapple on the ground. Okay. But the grappling was limited. You wouldn't stay on the ground for, I think you could only stay on the ground for maybe 30 seconds or 1 minute. It depends. So they wanted to keep the action.
Break it and get you up.
Yeah. So my first Sifu Johan, he basically asked me if I wanted to do this thing, right? And I learned, he taught a little bit of grappling. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, okay, yeah, sure. I mean, I had no idea how little I knew at that time, right? I think when I went to that tournament, I knew like how to do a mount escape. Yeah. And I think I knew like the arm lock from the guard or from the mount and maybe one choke. And that was it. And on top of that, everything else I knew was basic Wing Chun, straight kick, chain punches, framing, keep the guy off of you. And of course, I had a black belt in Taekwondo, so I could throw lots of very fast kicks and things like that. So my teacher asked me if I wanted to do this tournament, and I was like, okay, no problem. I was 18. It was like, he's like, you want to fight and do a sport jiu-jitsu tournament at James Demaio's school? Yeah, and I'm like, I hadn't even met James Demaio, and I knew that he was one of my teacher's teachers, and obviously he was Bruce Lee's student, right?
In the game, yeah.
And so I'm like, yeah, of course. And so when I go, and I've told this on the Dudes of Kung Fu podcast before, and also recounted the story with my first Sifu on that interview, which is on this channel as well. You got to go back with Sifu Johan. We talk about it because he was there. And I entered, they didn't have enough people to justify all the weight classes. So I ended up fighting someone who is bigger than me, and he was also a brown belt in jiu-jitsu. And I just remember this guy, and I was like,
they
okay.
Threw you in the fire, man.
Yeah, they threw me in the fire, right? And but I beat him. And I was very proud of that for a couple of reasons. One, he had, during the fight, he had managed to take me down. And as soon as he took me down, I immediately reversed it. And I remember in that moment hearing the crowd like cheering because I was very small next to this guy. And I was able to reverse him. And I just remember hearing everyone clapping, right? But then you weren't allowed, one of the rules of the sport jiu-jitsu tournament was like you weren't allowed to strike when you were on the ground. You could only strike when you were standing up. But the moment you went to the ground, you were only allowed to grapple. But like in all my excitement, I had like rolled him over and then I punched him one, right? I was like, and then like
automatic disqualification.
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't disqualification. As a matter of fact, I don't even think they took a point away because I think the referees were also not very experienced with this rule set, so they just stood us back up.
Okay.
And then he was exhausted because it took him a little while for him to get me down, and I was able with chain punches and kicks to kind of keep him away, and but he finally got a hold of me, took me down, but then I immediately reversed him, and when we stood back up, he was tired.
Yeah.
So I didn't do I used Wing Chun to kind of keep him off me at the beginning, but in the last part of the fight, I just used my Taekwondo. Why was I able to use Taekwondo against a jiu-jitsu guy? Because he was tired at that point. So I was just kicking him and staying away. And then when the fight was over, I won on points. Wow. And the crazy thing is that was in front of James Demaio. So I felt like, I did Wing Chun. I practiced Wing Chun. I beat this jiu-jitsu guy in front of James Demaio, one of Bruce Lee's students.
Yeah.
So, he wasn't a Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy. It was maybe more traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu at that time, but they were starting to do, it was in the early days. So anyone with any kind of grappling was kind of starting to work on that skill set a little bit more. But then after that, I had a chance to talk to James Demaio, and he signed my book. Alex, you did great. One day you'll be a great champion or something like that.
Cool
and that was like one of the best days of my life, right? And my second fight that same day, I was also exhausted after that fight because I didn't train for it. I only knew about it a few days before. Okay. And then the second guy I fought was actually one of James Demaio's students, so he was a Wing Chun guy. And I was so tired. That guy just he was he was a grown ass man. When I was 18, I still looked like a kid.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's some people like by the
Like
time
12.
by the time they're 13, they look like a grown ass man. When I was 18, I still looked like a child.
Right.
And this guy
I
was
had
funny.
that
He was like
syndrome too.
Yeah, he was like a grown ass man with facial hair and thick hands, and I'm like a
He was
child.
the opposite.
Yeah.
He was probably younger than you too.
No, he definitely wasn't. But he ran over me and just put me on the ground. But I didn't care because I'd beaten the jiu-jitsu guy. I didn't care that I lost to the Wing Chun guy, right? So I
Okay.
ended up getting third place, but I only had 2 fights, right?
Okay.
And so was very happy about that. So that was that. So my teacher's teacher, to kind of circle back, he was at that fight, but none of his students competed. Only my teacher's students decided as Wing Chun people, we were going to go in and fight against the jiu-jitsu guys. And then a few months later, when I moved to Seattle and I started training in his school, like the first day, he's like, oh, the jiu-jitsu competitor. And it was kind of funny because I was thinking like, yeah, bro, didn't see any of your boys at the tournament. It was only my, and
Where's
ever
all
since
the
then,
hostility coming
yeah,
from?
it was like that. And I trained there, and even though he didn't like me, I was still young and stupid. I was just coming to training and would
Yeah.
show up. And after a while, I realized like, oh, the vibe in the school is he doesn't like me. And then I didn't realize why, because I came from a school, Sifu Johan school, which was very nurturing, and I had a great relationship with him. And his teacher, he just didn't like me. And it was one of those things like I wasn't going to change it. So my interest in training at that school waned very quickly after, it took me a few months to realize, oh, the dude just doesn't like me.
Oh, okay.
And I had never been in a martial arts school, and I trained at a few schools at that point in my life already where the teacher didn't like me. I'd been to plenty of schools where they were like disciplinarians, where they were tough, but never something like that.
Okay.
So anyway, I started to get interested in more traditional Wing Chun, like because we were doing a non-classical Wing Chun style. We didn't even do the forms. So I was like, okay, basically what we're doing is a variation of Bruce Lee's edits. So Bruce Lee just did these few things and then taught it to those guys. And those guys are doing their version of Bruce Lee's edits. And I knew that Bruce Lee did not learn the entire Wing Chun system. So for me, I was like, okay, why don't I go back to the original source material and learn it and see if, knowing what Bruce Lee did later, if I would come to the same conclusion having had access to the same material. That was kind of my idea. And also maybe since Bruce Lee didn't have a chance to learn the whole Wing Chun system, maybe I would go and learn the whole thing, and maybe that would change my perspective on whether he did need to edit certain things or not, or whether certain things that were, you hear a lot of JKD people talk about what's missing in Wing Chun, and then you practice Wing Chun for a number of years and you go, it's not missing from Wing Chun. It's that Bruce Lee maybe didn't learn it and then later figured it out by going another path, but it doesn't mean Wing Chun didn't have it, right? So that was kind of my original impetus for like kind of moving out of that style, the non-classical style, and going to traditional Wing Chun, right? So anyway, I was looking for all the traditional Wing Chun schools, classical Wing Chun schools, I should say, in Seattle. But none of them were kind of blowing me away. Like I remember I went to one very super traditional, and I was watching the students, and it just looked very stiff and very robotic. And the place also smelled like cat piss.
Wow.
And then
that is a great selling point.
Exactly. And then I went to like another Wing Chun school in North Seattle, which was actually in some guy's basement, right?
Yeah.
And I remember he's like, okay, you got to watch the class first before you can participate. And I sat there and I watched, and I was falling asleep. Ooh. And mind you, I'm really into this stuff. So for me to fall asleep, I was like, okay, no. Nah. So, and then eventually I started to hear about WT, the Leung lineage, the WT Wing Chun.
Yeah.
And I heard about, and I had everyone's book. I would go to Chinatown. I had William Cheung's book. I bought Leung Teng's book. I bought all the books of all the Wing Chun books that were out at that time. I had all of them. And I started to hear more about Leung Teng and that he was very big in Europe and that he had a lot of fighters. And then I had read about, Emin and his clash with William Cheung. And then I heard like all this kind of stuff, right? But remember, these are in the days before YouTube, before the internet. So you can't just it's not so easy to like go and find out information.
Just finding nuggets.
Yeah, you gotta get this stuff through books, right?
Right.
And then in 1997, I went to Germany with my parents. And we went there because my uncle was having I believe, I could be mistaken. Well, maybe it was my grandma's birthday or it was my uncle's retirement. There was some reason why I was going to Germany. It was like a family thing. And while I was there, I bought a couple of martial art magazines in Germany. And I saw the EWTO, the, Leung Tang's branch in Europe. They had these ads in the magazines. And it showed the schools. And it was like 4 pages of like Wing Chun schools, literally in every single town and district in Germany. And I was like, what? And super professional, and everything just like looked really clean. And then had an ad for this book called Vom Zweikampf, which is On Single Combat, which is this book that Sifu Kanspecht wrote, which is essentially his dissertation on the Wing Chun style, at least how he understood it at that time.
Gotcha.
He's since changed a lot of his ideas about Wing Chun, but like that was kind of the standard work for what kind of the EWTO Wing Chun was and what it was based on. And the book only existed in German at that time. My father's German, but I couldn't really speak German. I took some German lessons when I was younger, and I could understand a little bit and I could read a little bit, but I couldn't even have a normal conversation, right?
Okay.
But I asked my uncle to order this book on single combat.
Yeah.
But it was in German. It was in German, right? And I think I even ordered like the Learn Ting Siunam Tao poster and like a couple little things like that, right? And then they sent it to my uncle, and then my uncle sent it to me in Seattle.
Okay.
And then I had this book, and I was thumbing through it, and I saw that Sifu Kanspecht talked about people like Jesse Glover, so also talked about people like from Seattle, the non-classical stuff, and he talked about the falling step and a lot of things that I was doing in the non-classical Wing Chun style. But this is a traditional Wing Chun guy, weight on the back leg, simultaneous techniques, forms, Siunam Tao. It was all the classical stuff, but he was emphasizing the practical application, fighting, and it was very scientific. The problem was I didn't speak German. And the book was, I remember just looking at it and going like, wow, this looks so fascinating.
Yeah, and
but I couldn't read it.
Oh, man.
So I had a German word book, like a dictionary.
Yeah, because there's no Google Translate.
Yeah, there's no Google Translate, right? And I would just like read something, and then I would go to the word book, and then I would look at it again and just like try to piece it together. And from what I could tell, it was super fascinating. But I'm like, I need to learn more. And in the back of that book was an advertisement for Langenthal Castle. And it said that, and the advertisement was in English.
Ooh.
And it was like, come train at the castle. It even had the prices on there. And I was like,
basically an open door to Americans.
Yes, right? Or at least, other people speak English. You know that, right?
Right.
Like English people.
Like English people,
yes,
right?
That's right. Forgot about those.
So I saw that and I was like, wow, this definitely looks interesting. So at that time, I started to get into WT, but I got into WT kind of around the back door. There was an instructor named Sifu Ralph Hanel, who's in Vancouver, Canada, which is like a 4-hour drive from Seattle. And I remember I drove, maybe 2 hours, 3 hours. I drove up and I met him, and he, had trained Wing Chun in Germany in the EWTO.
Oh, nice.
And so I did a private lesson with him, which was like an introductory thing. And basically, I'm there in his apartment, like in his living room. And he's like, I told him, like, I've done non-classical Wing Chun and I'm a black belt in Taekwondo, and I'm telling him all this stuff. And I'm looking at him, and he's not like the most physically imposing person, right? And I'm telling him all this stuff, and he seems like kind of half interested, like doesn't really care, right? And I'm like,
he's looking at his watch.
Yeah. Did you hear? I'm a black belt in Taekwondo. I've done Bruce Lee's Wing Chun, right? And then he's like, okay, so go ahead and try to attack me. And I'm looking at him, right?
Straight
and I'm
out
thinking
the movies.
you like throw a punch at you. He's like, oh, I don't care. Like,
I don't care.
Right?
Whatever you want.
Whatever you want, right? So I remember I just went to go give him a quick kick.
Yeah.
Right? Because most Wing Chun people could not stop my kick.
Yes.
And as my leg was like halfway up in the air, he just made a beeline and stepped in. He put his palm on my face and just shoved me back and closed the gap. Timing one. And I was like, oh. And I understood that in the Wing Chun I came from, we also, closed the gap and stuff like that. But it was a little bit less subtle, perhaps, right?
Yes, the way he did it.
And then I was like, and I'm like, he's like, you want to try again? I'm like, all right. So I did it again. Boom. And I was on the ground. And I'm like, and the fact that he did it in such an easy way.
Yes.
Then I was like, okay, there must be something here. And then I started to train with him, and I started to take private lessons, but I can only go up to Vancouver maybe once a month, a couple hours now and again. And so it wasn't enough for me. I wanted more. Now, at that time, there was no WT in the Seattle area. But there used to be a WT school run by a guy named Walter Schmidt. And Walter Schmidt used to be part of the American Wing Chun organization, AWTO, was the American branch of Sifu Larngting's organization. At that time, it was run by Sifu Emin Bostepe. And the Seattle representative was a guy named Walter Schmidt. Well, apparently, he had ended up getting kicked out of the AWTO.
How did he get kicked out?
I don't know the story because that was before I came.
Okay.
But he had a bunch of students, and some of them were a little bit more senior, so they were like without a teacher, right? So a couple of the students, they were only like student level 8, like mid-level students. They actually opened a branch around that same time. So it was all like totally by coincidence that when I'm getting into WT, these guys opened an official branch under Sifu Emin in Seattle. But they were not qualified instructors. They were just advanced students, right? And they were a little bit rusty. So I would go to train with Ralph in Vancouver, and he was like a second level technician, an instructor, really solidly skilled. And then I would train with these guys in the Seattle area, and they were super cool dudes. And the guy who opened the school, he was also, he taught a form of Vietnamese karate. And so he also taught karate and he taught Wing Chun, right? But karate was kind of his main thing. And he had a nice storefront location, beautiful place. But I could tell, having been exposed to Sifu Ralph, that Wing Chun wise, they were students. They were super enthusiastic and really helpful, and I'm very grateful for the time I had with them. But, I had like a proper instructor, but he was a few hours away. And then I was training with these guys. So I joined their school, and I officially joined the Wing Chun organization through them. So that school was my official training, right?
Oh, wow.
But then I would go and see Ralph every now and again, right? And then I found out that there was another guy in Seattle, another student of Walter, the guy who had gotten kicked out.
Found another nugget.
But he was higher up.
Okay.
And his name was Daniel, Chinese guy. I think he was a student level 12, so almost a first level technician.
Got it.
And everyone's like, dude, you got to learn from this guy. The problem was he wasn't officially part of the association anymore. And he
got kicked out too.
No, he didn't get kicked out. No, I just told you. His instructor left, so all the students scattered.
Got it.
So he just didn't want to do anything official, right?
Right.
But the problem was, and this kind of goes back to the culture of the old associations, if you weren't part of the association, or you didn't officially register your school, and you were teaching the Wing Chun that you had learned, they'd get really pissed off. Right? Because in those days, martial arts schools were a lot more proprietary about their styles.
Yes.
So if you were going to teach Wing Chun and you didn't do it in the association, you were basically considered a rebel, and then they would kick you out. All right? So Daniel didn't want to teach in the association because I think he didn't want to pay the monthly fees to be part of the association. But he was also scared shitless of Emin. Okay?
Yeah.
So I had gotten introduced to him by some brother of one of my friends who happened to know him. So it was all like total luck for me, right? So I would go and train with Daniel once a week. Now, the problem was he swore me to secrecy. I couldn't tell the guys because they knew him. He's their former Siheng. Wow. I couldn't tell them that I was training with him because, he didn't want any beef with Emin because they were doing their school officially under Sifu Emin. And he was kind of teaching, let's say, off the books, right? And then so he was like, you can't tell them that you're training with me. Here's the crazy thing. He was so paranoid that Emin was going to find out and like show up, like fly all the way from LA to Seattle just to kick his ass for it. I mean, Sifu Emin would have never done it, right? But these were the fears that people had back then, right?
He's a scary dude.
Yeah, and so like I would knock on his door and he'd like open the peephole. He'd look, close the peephole. He'd move the curtain. He'd look out. He'd open the door. He'd put his head out there and he looked. Yes. And then I would come in and he would close the door, right?
Straight from a movie.
Every single time. Not just the first time. Every week when I trained with him, it was like, he was so paranoid. And it happened that Daniel was the most skillful of that entire school. Of a Walter Schmidt school, he was the best guy. He was like the Dai Siheng of the school.
Gotcha.
So I started training with him and he beat the shit out of me. I mean, like we would do the old European Latzao sparring and he would just kick the shit out of me, right? But I learned very quickly. And then he would correct my Sunum Tao. A couple of weeks, he'd just beat the crap out of me. Then he would teach me the Chum Kyu. Then he would beat the crap out of me more. And then he started teaching me double arm Chi Sao. So I actually accelerated very quickly. But in the WT organization, you have to learn program 1, program 2, program 3. And then you don't learn Pun Sao until program 5, whatever, right? But I didn't even have student level 1 yet, but he was already teaching me all this stuff because he was just, in hindsight, I think he wanted to build me as a training partner for him.
Yeah.
So he's beating the crap out of me. He's teaching me Chi-Sao. And, and I remember during one session, he cracked me with an elbow and gave me a black eye.
Oh, nice.
And I, that night, had to go to the official school for my official training. And I had like a shiner.
And you can't say anything about
And
the
I
shiner.
can't say anything because I can't even say that I'm training with this guy, right? And he's like, oh, you can't tell
makeup or
anyone, right?
something?
No. But I had to go to the class that night. For whatever reason, I was thinking, oh, maybe I won't go. But then it's like, by the time the shiner heals, I don't want to miss a bunch of classes. So I'm like, I'll just make up some excuse. And I remember coming up with I don't remember what it was so many years ago.
Yeah.
But something, I hit my
You
head.
had something already.
I slipped, I fell, whatever. And I show up to the class and they're like, yo, what's up with that shiner? And I froze in that moment, like, because you're not telling the truth. You're telling a lie. And then so your brain is like panicking in that moment. I'm like, oh, my girlfriend hit me with her elbow in her sleep last night.
Oh, wow.
And it was like, where did that come from?
Violent dream elbow.
Yeah, violent dream elbow, right? And then it's like,
Okay.
okay, so I blame it on my girlfriend for some weird reason, right? And like, because I can't tell them that Daniel did it, right?
Looking like the abused
Yes.
boyfriend. Wow.
And so that was like, that was kind of my early WT training. So I really wanted to learn WT, but like the official school I was learning at, they weren't the most qualified, but they were really nice. And, I'm very happy that they did that because it became a hub which my Wing Chun grew from.
Awesome.
I had Ralph in Vancouver and then I had Daniel in Seattle, but it wasn't enough. And at that time, I didn't want to go to school. I was out of high school. I had a
Okay.
job for BMW, but I didn't want to stay in Seattle. I knew I just wanted to do WT.
Yeah.
So then I was at a crossroads. I'd done a couple of seminars with Sifu Amin, and I was like, I think I want to go to the castle that's in the back of that On Single Combat book. And then it was like, well, you could also go to Hong Kong, but I didn't have any connection to Hong Kong. And it was so exotic. It was like, how am I going to go to Hong Kong and train over there? Sifu Amin actually offered, when I contacted his headquarters, like, well, I could also go to LA and train at the headquarters there. But they didn't have a full-time academy set up the way it was in Germany. I'm like,
You wanted full
I wanted full-time,
Yeah.
right? So I'm like, I think I want to go to the castle. And then Sifu Amin his office had to write a letter of recommendation that I had to bring with me to the castle. And then basically in the summer of 1999, I just flew to Germany. Just went there. I contacted the castle. I said, I want to come and train. They're like, okay, no problem. And I flew there. And then I stayed with my aunt in Germany for about a month while I got acclimated. I got a car and I got everything set up. I got an apartment near Heidelberg. And then I basically showed up with this letter from Sifu Amy. And I'm like, I want to train here. And then that was the beginning. I met Sifu Andreas Gross. He was he's one of my Sihings. He passed away last year, unfortunately. And he was in the office. And I remember he had these amazing blue eyes. And he registered me, and then I was off. And
Was
so
he the first one you met at the castle?
he was the first one I met, but I met him in the office. And
Yes.
then the next time, I think it was maybe a Friday or something. And then my first class was on a Monday. Now, the way the castle worked is that training was basically 5 days a week.
Okay.
There would be weekend training, but there was usually special topic things, instructors, seminars, stuff like that. But it was Monday through Friday. And classes started at 10 a.m. and went until 5:30 a.m. or 5:30 p.m. And there were 2 sessions in the day, so you had kind of a 3 hours early session and 3 hours later, and there was a break in between. So you trained 6 hours a day, and
Sweet.
on Monday it was Sifu Bernd Wagner, the late Sifu Bernd Wagner. On Tuesday it was Sifu Heinrich Pfaff.
Okay.
Wednesday was Sifu Bernd again. On Thursday, for a while, it was a guest master day. You had a different master who came every Thursday. But then later it was Sifu Heinrich. And then on Friday, I think it was Sifu Heinrich again. Yeah, no, Sifu Heinrich was Friday. Thursday was always a different person. So basically, I had 2 primary instructors. I had Sifu Bernd and Sifu Heinrich, right? And I had already heard about them before I went to Germany because I talked to some WT people. They're like, oh, Heinrich Pfaff, he's the cat. His nickname was the cat.
Okay.
Because of the way he moved, right? And it was very different from Sifu Amin, who's just kind of very forward, power, aggressive Wing Chun guy. And Heinrich was, he moved like in a very, very different way, right?
Okay.
And then I also heard about Sifu Bernd Wagner, and I was like, wow, I'm going to be learning from all
What was
these
his
guys.
nickname, if he had one?
He didn't really have a nickname. They called him the Sunny Boy of Langenfeld because he was blonde and
Sunny Boy.
yeah,
Got
and,
it.
And he liked to he was kind of he was the cool kid. You know what I mean? He liked to go clubbing. He liked techno music.
Yes,
He was
right.
like the cool one, right? And so I remember my first class. I came on a Monday, and it was Sifu Band. And I came in, and then he peeks his head in, and he looks at me, and he goes, "Are you the American?" Because I guess they had told him that an American was there, right? I later found out that while some Americans had trained at the castle for short term, like maybe a week or a month or two, I was the only one who ever went there full time for the entire, like for a 3-year. I had a 3-year agreement with them. Ever, yeah, for like that entire length of time. There are people who had trained for a month or a couple months or whatever, right? But like a full-time castle
3-year
student,
stint.
apparently I was the only one stupid enough to decide to go to a country where I didn't speak the language.
Smart enough, yeah.
And
Right.
and do it, right? And then when I saw Sifu Band, because at that time my only exposure to Wing Chun was like I'd seen Sifu Imin at a couple seminars. And then of course my seeing Daniel kicking the crap out of me regularly, right? But you don't see much when you're getting your ass kicked.
Yeah.
And then when I saw Sifu Band was very dynamic and very technical and very skillful. And it was a very different presentation from the WT I had seen with Sifu Amy. And so I was like, wow, this guy's amazing. This guy's so slick and so cool. But then I was really worried because the next day was Sifu Heinrich. And I heard like, oh, he's the cat. And he's, and then people kept telling me he's one of the scariest dudes you'll ever meet.
Wow.
And then I was like, because I thought Emin was like the
know what to
scariest dude I had
expect.
ever met.
Yes.
I went to Emin
Okay.
seminar, you're like, geez, man. And then,
It's someone scarier than Imi.
yeah. And then I
Okay.
went to Tuesday and I was kind of nervous. And I only knew I could understand some basic German, but I couldn't speak it yet. And I went there and I remember like Sifu Heinrich was in there and then he spoke some words to me saying like, are you the American? He said it in German because he doesn't really speak English. And I was like so nervous. I couldn't even answer him. I was like, and then he tried to speak English to me. And he was like, what grade do you have? Meaning what student level do you have?
Okay.
Right? And then I didn't realize he's trying to speak English. So I'm trying to understand it as German. And then I was like, and I was just like like, this is the American who's coming to train with us. And just like, I'm like, oh my
You
God.
never get a second chance.
Everyone tells me this guy's like the scariest dude. And I'm like, I'm blowing it. I'm blowing it, right?
Wow.
And then eventually I understood. And then I started training with him. And then here's the crazy thing. When I moved to Germany, and I didn't know anyone. And the castle, so the closest big town to the castle at that time was Heidelberg. And Heidelberg is a small, quaint student town with a big castle, like for tourists and very quaint old German town. But it's a university town.
Okay.
But I mean, I had just been, before I came to Germany, I was working at BMW of Midtown on West 57th Street and 11th
So
Wild,
wild, yes.
right? And you go from like being in the heart of Manhattan, and now I'm in Heidelberg, and my apartment was in a little side area of Heidelberg. It wasn't even in the main part of town. It was called Heidelberg Ziegelhausen. It was like
Ziegelhausen.
up in the hills. There
Okay.
was no one there, right? And I had a nice apartment, super cheap, but I had no friends. So I would like be sitting in my apartment, no cable TV. I had a TV with a VCR. I brought 5 videos with me from the States.
Which ones?
I had gotten them in Hong Kong because the VHS in Germany was not the same one as the US. So I couldn't bring my US tapes. So in Hong Kong, I bought a bunch of VHS tapes, which is the same standard as in Europe. So I had Drunken Master 2, a Michael Wong movie called The Final Option, Tai Chi Master with Jet Li, New Legend of Shaolin, and a fantasy movie called Green Snake with Maggie Cheung. And these 5 movies in those 3 years, I just watch again and again. And that was actually how I slowly started to learn a little bit of Cantonese. Because although I was watching tons of Hong Kong movies, but I normally never watched one movie so many times.
Yes.
So because
right.
those were the only movies I had, there was no cable TV, I just watched them again and again and again and again and again. And after a while, I started to pick up the things that they were saying. So I really think it was actually my time in Germany, watching the same 5 Hong Kong movies again and again, that I slowly started to get a little bit of an ear for Cantonese and stuff like that. So I would train at the castle for 6 hours. And then I would come home and I had no friends. I would just go back to my apartment and I would write down what I learned that day. I would practice it in front of the mirror. I would make myself some god-awful meal because I can't cook. I only ate, spaghetti and put a fried egg on it, and that's my dinner, right?
Yes.
And then I would watch one of these 5 movies, and that was like my day every day until my two best friends, they later became my best friends during the time at the castle, these 2 Norwegian guys came to train, but they didn't come until about 6 months later.
All right.
And so like the first 6 months is just me doing nothing but training for 6 hours, and then going home, practicing, writing notes, and all that kind of stuff. And then a few months into my time in Germany, I got a letter from the German authorities, because the reason why I could stay in Germany is because my father's German, so I also have German citizenship.
German citizenship.
Okay. The problem is at that time, military service was compulsory for all males, 18 and older. So when you move to Germany, it's different. Like here, when you move somewhere, you get your new apartment and you get your Con Ed bill or whatever, and then the government knows where you are, right? But in Germany, because it's German, you have to go to the local town hall and you have to register your address. And like, it's not like here you just move and who cares, right? Mm-hmm. There you have to like go and you have to register and tell them everything. I remember I had to register my address when I first moved to Heidelberg Ziegelhausen. Okay. And they were asking me questions like what my religion was and all these kind of, I'm like, what? Wow. This is very weird, right? And then, but here's the thing. Once you registered your address, you're official. So I was a German citizen, male, at that time maybe 21 years old, who had not yet had military service. So it took them about 3 months before I got this letter saying like, hey, Mr. Richter, German man Richter, who has not done military service yet. And the thing was written in what's called Amtsdeutsch, which is like a legalese official. These are not words that normal Germans use, right? So my super limited German skills were like, ugh. Yeah. I remember reading this thing and just like half the words in there were like this. I had no idea, but I knew this had something to do with the army. And it had something to do with me having to join it. It said like I had to go to Mannheim, which was like the next big town over. And in 3 weeks or 4 weeks, I had to join the army. Whoa. And I was like, what? Right? So here I am, only a few months into my time in Germany. And now suddenly it's like I have to go to the military. So the German military?
Okay, so you didn't do the army.
Well, so I'll tell you how I got out of it. So I had this idea. I was like, all right, I'm an American. I also have an American passport, right?
Okay.
And Americans, we're pretty arrogant, right? We go, I'm an American. So what if I'm also a German citizen, also an American, right? I remember reading in the back of the American passport, the U.S. passport says, this passport does not exclude you from serving in foreign militaries if you have dual citizenship. And I remember reading that and going like, oh Jesus Christ. Like, okay. Like,
it specifically says
it. Yeah, it specifically says it. Like as if my own passport was sticking a middle finger up at me, right?
Right.
So I go, all right, I got another tactic for this. All right. I'm going to show up and I'm going to make them not want to conscript me into the German military. I'm just going to make myself unenlistable.
What?
That was my brilliant idea.
What? So you went there.
So I drive to Mannheim. I park my car. I go into this office. And I don't know what the hell inspired me, but I decided in order to make them really not like me, I have to be the dumbest American who's ever walked into their place. And so for some reason, I decided to do a Southern accent as if that would somehow improve my case.
Right.
So I walked right in. I remember I was like waiting outside the door and I just opened the door and just walked in like Kramer from Seinfeld. And I was like, excuse me.
Sliding in.
Yeah, I'm like, I got this letter in the mail and I don't really know what it means. And you think someone could explain this to me? And I don't know what.
You're all loud and obnoxious.
I don't know what possessed me to use that freaking accent. Because also the other problem is I started using it and then realized I'm going to have to keep this up for the rest of my visit here.
Yeah.
And then like the German lady was there and she was like, oh, and then she looked and she saw, you're Mr. Richter. She spoke a little bit of English, right? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, I got this letter. I don't really know what it means. I guess it means I need to come to arm, but I'm also an American citizen. I don't know why. And like, and then she's like, okay, wait in this room, right? and she puts me into this waiting room.
Wow.
And I sit in the waiting room and they leave me in there.
Interrogation time.
No, they leave me in there for 45 minutes. And I was there like on time for my appointment. And there's no TV in there. There's some German magazines.
Cameras.
I was 100% sure they're watching me on camera. And I'm
Okay.
like, I knew I could understand a little bit of German at that time, right? But my idea was I was going to go in there and pretend I didn't speak or understand any German. Because here's the thing. Why would you want me in your army if I can't even understand what you're saying? I would be way more trouble than it's worth. This was really my
was the
21-year-old
mindset.
brain's
Okay.
plan.
Right.
They're not going to want some buddy who can't speak the language. So I'm in there for 45 minutes. I'm like, I know they're watching me. I can't read the magazines because I can't give away that I know any German. So I'm just sitting there, biding my time. Finally, they bring me to another room, and there's some German military guy, bunch of fancy medals and stuff on there, right? And he sits down, and this dude is looking at me like a hawk. All right? And then they bring in a translator because I told them I don't speak German. And so here's the problem. I am not an actor, okay?
Yes. Okay.
But suddenly I'm in a position where I'm going to need some Oscar-worthy performance to pull this thing off.
All right.
Because the German military guy speaks German to the translator, and then the translator tells it to me. The problem is I more or less understand at that point. I mean, my German got much better later, but I knew what he was saying.
Oh, no.
But I had to pretend that I didn't.
You had to act like you didn't
I had to act like I
understand
didn't
what-
say it.
Yes. All right.
And the first thing he says to the translator is, and he says in German, obviously, tell Mr. Richter that the fact that he doesn't speak German does not preclude him from service in the German military. Wow. And so I hear him say that.
You had to act like you
And
don't
I
know.
understood what he said, and my heart just went into my groin. And then, but I have to pretend like I just don't know what he said, and I look over there, and then she translates it to me, and I'm like, oh, okay. And while she's translating to me, he's watching me like a hawk. And I'm starting to sweat because I'm thinking, he knows my gambit. He knows it. I'm thinking like I'm the smartest guy I can imagine. It probably doesn't happen often, but I can imagine it's happened before. This dude knows the deal.
Right.
All right. And so there was a little bit of back and forth. And then basically I told him I came to Germany to study martial arts, and I have a contract with the castle, and I'm not here to live or to stay. And if I could prove that I was only in Germany for a time of limited duration, that I wasn't going to continue living there afterwards, that I could get out of it. So I went back to the castle. Well, actually, I have to say, before I left, after they told me this, I was like, okay. And then he says in German, I think he understood me no problem. He says it in German. God, Jesus Christ.
And knowing that you understood him, he said it to the translator.
No, he said it more or less looking at me at the end as I went by, as I shook his hand, and I was like, "Oh my God!" It was one of the.
And you
it was
still had
one
to
of the
play it off
scariest
like
times.
you didn't know.
It was one of the scary. I could crack a diamond in my butt at that point. I was so nervous, right? And then before I left, they're like, "Oh, go see the front office before you leave."
Yes.
I'm like, "Okay." I go to the front office, and
See this woman again.
This is the difference between Germany and America. She goes, "Where do you live?" I said, "I live in Heidelberg Ziegelhausen." "Did you take a train here or did you drive here?" "I drove here." "Did you pay for parking?" "Yes." "How long did it take you to get here?" So. And she goes, "Okay." And she gives me $20. "Thank you for your time."
What?
Yes, because it's like a government thing, and they're taking you out of your normal workday. They have to compensate you for the expense it took to have to do government business. And and then she it was in marks. It was still before. I don't remember what the exact
Basically
amount was.
Validated your parking
Yeah.
and your trip.
And I was
everything.
and then she after this, you have to imagine after this scary ass situation, and then they give me this 20 spot, and I'm like, thanks. I'm like, what is going on here? This is way too scary, right? And so
Okay.
I get in my car, I drive back, and then the next day I go to the castle and I meet with Sifo Andreas, my Siheng, who's in the office there. And he was also in the German military. And I told him the situation. He was like, no problem. And he wrote me a letter saying, to the military people that I was only there for a limited time. I had a contract, blah, 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 blah. And he wrote it and he signed it. And then I sent it to him. And then a month or two later, I got a letter saying that I was exempt from going to the German military, right? But that was like,
wow, dude.
There was a moment in time where I was like a little...
So close.
Yeah,
so close.
A little worried there. So, so anyway, kind of back to, it's funny. I'm talking about like, I'm going to tell castle stories, and we're like an hour into the podcast, and I talk about a bunch of nonsense, right? And so the interesting thing about training at the castle was that you had 6 hours with Sifu Bant on Monday, 6 hours with Sifu Heinrich on Tuesday, and then it would kind of alternate in this way. Every Thursday, at least for the first year, we had what was called Gastmeisterunterricht, or guest master class.
Master class.
Yes, and there was a different, in WT, you're a master once you're a fifth practitioner and above.
Okay.
And so every Thursday, there was a different fifth level practitioner who would come to the castle and teach. So I had the two like really top guys in the EWTO teaching me on a regular basis, but every Thursday, I saw another guest master, and I would see people like Sifu Thomas Mannes, people that I had only read about in magazines, and they would be there in the flesh. And, all the different Sifu Edel and Sifu Tausend and Sifu Tazos and all of these guys. I saw all of them. So like within the span of a year, I had basically seen the entire roster of masters. So I had Sifu Bant and Sifu Heinrich to kind of compare to, but then I knew, okay, this guy like is really into fighting. This guy's very technical. This guy's very this guy's very that. And it gave me a very pluralistic way of looking at Wing Chun. Whereas like from my old Imin days, you kind of always had the assumption like there's only one way to do Wing Chun. You just step in and chain punch, you do it like this, and that's it. And here I was learning like, from people who were shorter and they were using different techniques, and people who emphasize footwork, and people emphasize different parts of the theory. And I was starting to go like, wow, there's many ways to do WT. It's not just step in a straight line and try to run the guy over with chain punches. There's angles and footwork and different ways of using chi sao and all this kind of stuff. So it allowed me to not be so like one of the problems with Wing Chun people and traditional martial artists in general is that normally within their own line, they only know what their Sifu teaches, and they don't know anything else. And what I mean by anything else is they don't even know what other people in their own line teach. So in other words, their filter is not just their lineage, but it's also their teacher's vision of their own lineage. So even within their own lineage, they're quite limited. And that's a problem all over the place. And the 3 years in Germany broke me of that because I had so many different instructors. I had a couple primary instructors. Later, Sifu Heinrich, a few years later, he left the castle. He had a disagreement, and then he quit and left. And then they replaced him with Sifu Thomas Schrön, who taught me basically for the last year and a half. I think I was in Germany.
Got it.
And then then I would go to Sifu Heinrich was still part of the EWTO at that time, but then he was teaching in his own school. So once a week on Thursdays, I would go to Sifu Heinrich school and train with him.
Okay.
And then, but then I also had Sifu Thomas Schrön there, and he gave me yet another perspective, right?
Wow.
So I was super lucky, and this really paved the path for me later to learn directly from Sifu Leung Teng, because I didn't have this kind of like, only my Sifu has taught me, and I only know this one way. I had seen this guy's way and that guy's way and this guy's way. So it gave me a lot of perspective, and it's part of the reason why I don't have such a close-minded view about how to do things in WT compared to the people who only had one or two teachers, right? So it ended up being to my advantage. And it started with, there was a rivalry between Sifu Bant and Sifu Heinrich.
Yo.
And my two primary instructors. And every week it was something like this. On Monday, Sifu Bant would teach us. He would teach like, whatever he taught that day, the chi sao, fighting applications, whatever. And Tuesday, the next day, we'd come in. And Sifu Heinrich, not always, but sometimes, would go, so what did Bant teach you guys yesterday? All right? And then we would show him, and he would be like, yeah, we should do. And then his lesson that day would often be like a complete dismantling of what Sifu Bant had taught us the day before. And the problem was, and the problem was, this is difficult for Germans, because the reasons why Germans build such great cars is because you do it this way and no other way. So for the Germans, when they came on Tuesday and they like spent 6 hours absorbing what Sifu Bant had taught the day before, only to have that thing completely and ritualistically destructed and deconstructed the next day. They would be like, there cannot be two ways of doing things. Right? But me, because one, I think being an American, we're much more open to kind of different viewpoints. But for the Germans, it was like, what way does it go? I cannot compute two ways of doing PRESALE, right? But for me, basically, my entire time in Germany was, you know that meme of Michael Jackson eating the popcorn while he's watching, and people always put that meme when two people are fighting online, and then someone just posts the meme of Michael Jackson like sitting back eating the popcorn in Thriller.
Right, yes.
That was basically me in Germany, right? This Sifu would teach something. The other Sifu would say, no, this is totally wrong because X, Y, Z. And I'd be in the middle going, okay, so let me hear the merits of what you do. You defend your case. Okay? Now this guy's going to defend his case. Okay? And then it gave me the chance to think about it and go, I actually like what the guy says here, but I prefer this guy's way of doing it over here. And then what ended up happening is I ended up being able to fuse it in a way that, and the castle was very strong. You had like Team Bernd and Team Heinrich. Wow. So you had some people, like they wouldn't even come on the days Heinrich taught, and you had Heinrich guys who wouldn't come on the day that Bernd taught.
But you went to both.
No, I went to all of them.
Yeah.
And me and the Norwegian, we went to all of them.
That's right.
Because we didn't have this problem, right? This idea that two things can be true at the same time. There's not only one thing, right? So it allowed us to go back and forth. But it was, and apparently when Sifu Bernd had started learning Wing Chun in his early years, Heinrich was one of his teachers. And then later Bernd became an instructor. So then I think there was this kind of thing like the student thought he was on the same level as the teacher or whatever. Okay. And here's the thing. I love both those men equally.
Yes.
Okay? Like, I definitely was more on the Heinrich side of things because as I started to train more in the castle, Sifu Heinrich started to take me more and more under his wing. And I started to really appreciate his way of doing things, right? And also, Sifu Bernd used to beat the living crap out of me. Well, don't worry. Sifu Heinrich used to beat the crap out of me too, but it was very organic. Like, we would just do Chisao and he just crack me one, right? And Sifu Bernd would use me as the demonstration partner.
Yes.
So he would want to show the movement that we're going to practice. He would always take me.
Kill you, yeah.
And he would just crack me, hit me in the throat, hit me in the nose. And the reason why that started was because when I started at the castle and I couldn't speak any German or little German, he would pick me and he'd crack me one and it would hurt. I mean, look, we do martial arts. Okay, you hit me, it hurts. I'm not going to complain about it, but I'm not going to say like it didn't hurt when he cracked me for a demonstration, right?
Yeah.
I didn't say anything. Why didn't I say anything? Because I couldn't speak German. And then so at one point, Bernd, I remember he said to everyone, he goes, see, I always take Alex. Unlike you guys, he doesn't complain when I hit him. But the thing was, because the first few months I couldn't speak any German, so I didn't say anything when he hit me. And by the time I could speak German, it was too late. He was already kicking me and punching me every time he demonstrated something, right? So it was like, and then he used to tell people, says, yeah, Alex is tough because he comes from Sifu Emin's organization. Those guys are tough. You guys can't take it. He can take it, right? And then so, then he's like it's like, well, it does hurt. I mean, I wasn't complaining. I wasn't like bleeding or anything like that, right? But it was like every time, 4 or 5 times in a class when he wants to show something, I know I'm going to get a nick on my lip or whatever. And you're just being the demonstration idiot, right? So,
Grin.
Yeah, so that kind of became the thing. So I love, both those men equally. And they were such huge influences on my Wing Chun. And so even though you had people that were very partial to Sifu Bernd and people that were very partial to Sifu Heinrich, for me, I definitely was more on the Sifu Heinrich side of things. But I learned so much from Sifu Bernd.
I understood that when I was coming up, people would compare you to Bernd more. So from some of my students, because Sifu Bernd had a viral video on YouTube where you see him being very technical. Okay. Where he, back in the old days at the castle, and you see there was a certain way that he moved. He used to teach in combinations. So he wouldn't teach like in a very organic step-by-step way. He would be like, all right, if someone punches you, you do. He would kind of show us like how to expand the way we put the Wing Chun arsenal together. Okay. So like a lot of those kind of slick ways of putting things together that I have from him, because that was very different from how Sifu Heinrich taught. Sifu Heinrich taught in a more organic, standardized way. Sifu Bernd taught more in kind of combinations. And so Sifu Bernd showed a lot of cool stuff, which is great for demos, and also great for mixing it up and adding a little bit of hot sauce to the way you do Wing Chun. But kind of the meat and potatoes from like, how to step and punch and everything, we got that more from Heinrich. At least I did. Because for other people it could be different. But then later,
when Siva Heinrich left the castle, and then I would just see him once a week at that point. Siva Thomas Schreun took over. He's Mai Si Hing, and now he's actually one of the highest graduated guys in the EWTO.
Wow.
And he was completely different from both of them.
How so?
He was very foundational, very much about like the quality of your steps and punches and your basics and everything like that, and didn't teach lots of fancy stuff. And he was in lots of sparring training and lots of conditioning. And he was a big dude, all right? And I remember for my student level 12 test, he was doing a kick test with everyone, and he was just kicking everyone, and no one could stop the kick. Ooh. And he's like a big dude. He's like 6'2", 6'3".
Okay.
And I'm 5 foot nothing. All right. and then he comes up to me, and I remember he looks at me and he says, "Enttäusch mich nicht," which is don't disappoint me, because he had kicked every single other person he got.
Enttäusch mich nicht.
Yeah, which is like don't disappoint me, because he had kicked everyone else. And then like I just went in and defended it, and then he was like, and he gave me it, and I was like, whoa. But he might have been going easy on me, right? But I really liked him because he was super tough and super fair. And he used to smoke. I don't think he smokes anymore, but he used to take like some smoke breaks. And he was just such a badass. We had this one Scottish guy, and he used to call him, Thomas Schreun is the destroyer of man. I can't do the accent, but he's called the destroyer of man, right? And and he was so great. And so I had him for like the last portion of my training career. So he tested me for my higher levels, and he was always fair, and really enjoyed training with him. I remember for one of the tests, he had these gloves on, and he goes, "Are you ready?" And we were going to do like the old European style Letzel. And I go, "Okay." And then he just cracked me one right on the eye. Ooh. And because he had these thick gloves on, like you ever get poked in the eye, right? Yeah. But sometimes if, when you're sparring with normal gloves on, the glove hits your eye and it feels like an eye poke. Okay. But it's not an eye poke, right? But he just cracked me, and it just went, my eye was over to hit the glove, and I couldn't see. And then he cracks me 2 or 3 more times, and he's like, "Wake up." Yes. And then like I just, and I had to go back, and I had to keep fighting. And then so his tests were always like that. He was very tough. But what I liked is that for my higher level tests, like 10, 11, 12, and for my prep for a primary, he did all of those tests for me, and he tested us for every single one, and they were like real solid tests. And a big part of how we do the student level 9 test and certain aspects I have from the way he did it. I mean, like, even though I'm known as a very kind of Hong Kong style Wing Chun guy, I have a huge influence from certain instructors and certain influences in Europe that are undeniable and will always be there. And so that was, that was kind of the, the way those things kind of worked out.
His name
Schreun. Yeah, Schreun. Thomas Schreun. Yeah.
Okay.
And, and then I mentioned the 2 Norwegian guys, right? And they were like my best friends when we were over there. Now, there's lots of stories that will never make it on this podcast in terms of, we were young guys, right?
Wow.
But one story I'll tell you. So Gaute was, he was just like me. We would go and train. After training, we would come home, we would practice. We'd read books about Wing Chun. We'd discuss what we did. We'd watch movies. Jürgen liked to party.
Yeah,
okay?
All right.
And so the entire 3 years I was in Germany, I didn't have a girlfriend. I didn't drink. I just stayed. It was like I lived like a monk, right? Yeah. I watched only 5 movies. It was a very monk-like existence, right?
Oh, goodness.
And Jürgen, though, like after training, he would train with us for 6 hours. But, after training, we would come home, and Gaute and I would go over what we did that day. We would write down our notes. We would discuss it. And then we would make some dinner and hang out. Oh, Jürgen.
So dope.
Yeah. Jürgen. So we didn't just train for the 6 hours. It continued on. It didn't stop. Jürgen, he would come home. He would take a shower. He'd shave his head. He'd put on his nice clothes. And he'd go into Heidelberg, and he'd go to the bar. He'd go whatever. And he was always like, he was like the man about town, right? Mm-hmm. And at one point, he got a job to earn a little bit of money. And he got a job working at a bar. And so he was always getting into shit, right? Meanwhile, we were like training Wing Chun regularly. And like we had like some, you could call them gym wars, where we were like going at it and training. But we weren't getting in like street fights all the time outside. We had a couple things that happened outside of the castle, but like, it wasn't like we were, showing up and getting in fights all the time, right? But Jürgen, and he was a super peace-loving dude, he would always get into some shit with someone. He was always finding ways of getting in trouble, right?
More curious about stuff. Yeah.
So he was at a bar working one night. It was Halloween, and it was a Halloween party at the bar. Right. Everyone is dressed up. Everyone is sauced. And apparently there was a guy there who was in a full chicken costume. All right? Like, almost, you can imagine almost like a chicken mascot costume.
You can't go to a party without one of those.
Always one of those dudes, right? And this guy was getting a little obnoxious. And so Jurgen was told by his boss, I guess maybe they didn't have a proper bouncer, or they knew that Jurgen did Wing Chun, or whatever the story was. Like, hey, Jurgen, can you kick this guy out? Jurgen's like, sure, no problem.
Can you kick this chicken out?
Can you kick this chicken out?
Sounds like the Family Guy recurring scene. where-
Yes. You know what's funny? I cannot watch Family Guy when they have the recurring, like, endless battle with the chicken.
Yeah.
Without thinking about
this.
because Jurgen goes to kick the chicken guy out, and the guy gets super aggro. Mind you, he's got a full chicken helmet on. I mean, it's not just like he doesn't just have like a fake beak. He's got like in my mind, you know, every time because he told me the story, and in my mind's eye, I don't see a chicken costume. I see a Big Bird costume. I see like a dude dressed like Big Bird. Okay, like in my mind, I cannot actually envision, but he was like, yeah, it was like the full helmet and everything. So it was like almost like a mascot type costume, right? And Jurgen is telling this guy, like, you got to get out. And then the chicken goes to push him, like pushes him. And Jurgen like puts his hands up in the fence, like, hey, man, don't do that again.
Okay.
The chicken comes at him. And Jurgen just starts chain punching the chicken, like stepping and punching, chain punching the chicken all the way towards the door.
Out the door.
And finally, you know, like the chicken tries to grab him because the chicken is wearing like this big helmet on his head, so the punches don't have the same effect. So he's like hitting the head, hitting the chest, and like the guy's in a padded suit, right? And eventually, like, they pull him off, and the chicken went out there, and then, you know, he comes back and tells us the story the next day. And he's like, I've used Wing Chun before. And Jurgen had one of the hardest punches of all of us. In fact, the only time I've ever been knocked out, like
in class,
KTFO, ever in my entire life, was in class, and it was Jurgen. All right? Wow. Jurgen was playing the non-Wing Chun guy, and he just cracked me with a cross. Like, he was the non-Wing Chun guy, I was the Wing Chun guy, and I wasn't paying attention. Oh, no. And boom, out. It was the only time Jurgen punches like a freaking mule, kicks. All right? So he was like, hey, he's telling the story. He's like, hey, I have a good punch. When I hit people, they go away. He goes, I couldn't knock out this chicken. He was like so distraught because I think the next day he was still a little drunk from that night before, and I'm sure he was drunk even though he was at work, right? And he was like, I just could not knock out this chicken, and he was so distraught by it, right? He's like, yeah, I hit him in the head, I hit him in the chest. It didn't matter where I hit the chicken; he didn't go down, right? And so, like, he was very, very distraught by this situation.
From hell.
Yeah. So, wow. You know, like, so those were, like, some of the things that happened, you know, during that time. And, like, when I look back at it, all right, and I didn't really have much contact with Sifu Kanspek besides seeing him at seminars. And, of course, Sifu Leungting came to seminars regularly in Germany. I could see Sifu Leungting multiple times a year, or at least once a year, but at multiple locations, because then Sifu Leungting would be at the castle, then he'd go to Berlin, and we'd drive to Berlin and follow him there, and he would do another location. So we literally, when we would just follow and do the seminar tours, right? And we just had a kind of carte blanche to do as much Wing Chun as we wanted while we were there. It was amazing. Yeah. So we took full advantage of that. So I would see Sifu Kanspek during seminars, and then he tested me for my primary level and had a very good testing experience with him, and it was super great. And I'm always very fond of that. And even though I'm known primarily as a Hong Kong-style WT practitioner, but like I would be remiss if I didn't say that if it were not for my 3 years at the castle, I wouldn't have really been prepared to learn the way I did from Sifu Leungting. Because the German way of doing things, even though maybe the programs were a little bit different than the way I learned in Hong Kong, but the Germans taught me a number of things. One is to pay attention to every single detail. And another thing is to make sure that everything you're learning has an internal consistency. Because if we're doing a Wing Chun fighting system, you can't have, if it's a fighting system, I should say, it cannot have things that don't fit. Because then it's not a system.
Okay.
So the 3 years of training gave me a really good foundation, both of physical training, because we had very tough training and we had really good training partners and really fantastic instructors. But also this, you know, and I learned from so many different masters, Oliver Koenig, Giuseppe Schembri, all of these guys, and they all had a different way of looking at it, and they all enhanced that. And it kind of set the stage for me to learn from Sifu Leungting critically. And I don't mean like to critique Sifu Leungting, but to, you know, some people learn from Sifu Leungting and they were like, oh, they just do everything the way he says it, and they don't think critically about what they're learning from him. But I, because of my time in Germany, had a template by which to look and organize what I was learning from Sifu Leungting and for what is the relevant value of this thing I'm learning. Is this thing as important as this other thing? Where do I place this and put it? And that helped me organize everything.
It helped you find yourself more easily. Yeah.
Absolutely. And from a real basic perspective, it was the only way I had a chance to train 6 hours a day, 5 days a week anywhere. You couldn't even do that in Hong Kong. I mean, if someone says they train 6 hours a day, they go to class for an hour and a half, and the rest of that training is on their own.
On their own.
But I was in class 6 hours a day, plus then the training afterwards. So this was like a complete immersion. And because especially early on, I didn't have any friends and I had so much free time, I had like all the WT books like that were out at that time, Wing Chun Kun and Roots of Wing Chun and Dynamic Wing Chun. And I just read them again and again and again
On top
and
of
again.
the
So
5
I just
videos.
knew on top of the 5 videos. So like, you know, like Sifu Leungting's Wing Chun Kun, I can like recite that thing backwards. I could do an audiobook version of it without having to read the text at this point, right? So all of this kind of contributed to me just having this immense base from which to then when I came to the States in 2002, when I started learning privately from Sifu Leungting, even though he was telling me, okay, I need to do things this way, I need to change this, I have to learn Gosao, I have to learn Lutzao in a different way or whatever. But because I had such a pluralistic way of looking at Wing Chun, it allowed me to kind of start to organize those things. And then I was also learning from Sifu Carson Lau privately and in seminars. And Sifu Carson Lau, although he's obviously Hong Kong style Wing Chun, his Wing Chun is a little bit different from Sifu Leungting's. And then, you know, occasionally I would take a private lesson in Hong Kong, only a few, not many, with maybe Sifu Chang or Sifu Leung Kun. And their Wing Chun was different from Sifu Leungting's. But had I not been exposed to the wide breadth of knowledge in the EWTO through all of these masters, I would have viewed the different variations as conflicts. And I wouldn't have been able to, I'd be like, oh, this guy says I have to do the Tansel this way. The other one says I have to do this way. What am I going to do? But when you see things from different perspectives, you start to compartmentalize and you can contextualize why this guy might do it this way and this guy might do it that way. And this enhances your knowledge. I would not have been able to understand that much had I only learned in Hong Kong or had I only learned in Los Angeles or had I only learned from one instructor. I am,
amazing.
You know, for what I have achieved in Wing Chun, which is maybe very little, and what I've achieved with my school, whatever people think it is, I'm totally standing on the shoulders of the EWTO and the giants that came before me, even if what I teach, maybe from a technical perspective, looks a little more old school Hong Kong, or from a training methods perspective might look a little bit different, like because I use modern training methods with classical Wing Chun. But I wouldn't have come up with that stuff without the EWTO. I mean, I'm so eternally grateful to the EWTO and to, you know, my time in Germany and to all of the instructors.
I definitely relate to that, because coming up here, even though you're my main Sifu, I definitely learned a lot from my Hangs and got to see the differences between my CJ Nicole and my Cailloux and all that.
Yes. And then also me telling you that those differences are totally fine.
Yes.
Not being like these differences are kind of breaking, you know, breaking everything you knew, right? And it's funny, like, you know, it's not to rag on the Germans. Hey, I'm half German. If I give Germans a hard time, all right, you can't cancel me because I'm German, all right?
Like the time CJ Nicole would say, "What did Caillou teach you?" And then teach me.
Yeah, it wasn't like that, right?
Happened, but
yeah, but it's you know, Germans are so great at engineering because they have such a logical based mindset, right?
Yeah.
But it's also why they had a very difficult time with different variations, because it's like these two different things can't be true, right? But I was able to kind of see that for what it was, which is, you know, the guy who's built like this, like Sifu Thomas Mannes, one of the, you know, OGs of the EWTO. I took 1 or 2 guest master classes with him, and then every year he has a seminar, or he did at that time, which was like a weekend, like 3-day or 5-day. I think it was 5-day, might have been 3-day seminar intensive in the summer. And it happened to be when the castle had 1 month was closed in the summer for break. So we had a month off.
Like our ITC here.
Yeah, I never went back to the States in that 1 month. I usually
trained more.
I usually trained, or I went to Berlin for the
Okay.
summer, or I went once to the Sifu Thomas Manus' school, where he had this week. And then like we didn't have a place to stay. We just slept in his school. It was amazing. And I remember, I think the topic was like the 5 ranges of fighting. I don't remember if it was 3-day or 5-day. I don't remember. But it was like each day was a different range. Like the first day we just did kicking range, and the second day was just punching, so punch and punch defense, then elbow, knee, and then throws, and then ground fighting. We did the ground fighting with no mats. And I remember after that, like I could not walk for 2 weeks, but I loved it.
Yeah.
And these guys were, Sifu Thomas Manus, like to learn from him, because I had only seen him in the old Unsingle Combat book. And then I knew he was one of the OGs. And like for me, it was a huge honor to learn from all these guys. And like, so even though now, usually when I talk about stories, I talk about the guys I learned from in Hong Kong, or talk about guys I learned from in, Sifu Leung Ting or Sifu Cheng or Sifu Carson Lau was a huge influence in my Wing Chun. Yeah, but I mean, even though my Wing Chun is maybe not the same as it was, what I do from a technical perspective, right? But I still get goosebumps when I think about Sifu Thomas Manus from those days, and think about seeing Sifu Imin for the first time, and seeing Sifu Heinrich. I remember one time there was like a high-level technician from Austria visiting, and Sifu Heinrich was doing Chisao sparring with him, free, and he was just letting this guy come at him. And at one point, Sifu Heinrich just stood on one leg, and he was just chucking this dude. I had never, I had not seen it with my own eyes. I wouldn't believe it. He was standing on one leg, and the guy he was sparring with was a 4th level technician. This is no slouch. And he's just chucking this guy and playing around with him like he's nothing. On one leg, and moving back and pulling him and tossing him. And I was like, wow. And like my understanding and the way I teach and show Wing Chun is very different from that time. But man, that was a cool ass time in my life. That was a really cool ass time in my life. And I'll always look back at it extremely fondly.
I mean, I'm always fascinated by the whole idea of training that much.
Yes.
Because we do it during the ITC, but you did it for 3 years straight. I know you have more stories.
Yeah, I don't think, yes.
We can't go into everything, but I think we should just, if the audience wants that, Castle stories.
Castle stories.
Stories.
Well, okay.
once
To be
in a
fair,
while.
I think I set the stage for that. You know why? Because I didn't tell too many specific stories. I kind of basically
agree.
told the story of how I went there.
I agree.
And who's who. There's lots of stories, individual. I
gotta
have to write them down and see which ones are okay for public consumption, and also
Okay.
because some people are still around. You
Yeah.
always got to watch out for the butt hurt, and also some stories that might make me not look so great, right?
Yeah.
But
right.
so I'll take a look. Maybe we'll revisit it, but of course it's totally up to the audience whether they want, want me to talk about this stuff again or whatever. So
Please, guys, chime in.
Awesome.
Let us know.
well, hey man, that was a lot of fun, man.
Yes,
So we'll definitely do this again sometime.
I want more.
All right, guys. So what did you think of today's episode? Do you like when I tell these old stories, or are you not into it at all? Would you want me to do more of these old castle stories? Let me know. Chime in the comments below. And if you have other ideas for us to cover on the podcast, let me know. I look forward to hearing from you guys. And before we get out of here, I just want to let you guys know I've set up a Patreon page for the Kung Fu Genius for those of you who want to support us. A lot of our old supporters from Dudes of Kung Fu have already joined, so I'm super happy to see that. For Patreon supporters, we have a couple things. You will get episodes a few days early. That is, the episodes are normally now going to come out on Monday with the premiere at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Patreon supporters will get the episodes around Friday. On top of that, I have all sorts of special exclusive content, which is just for the Patreon supporters. That includes audio versions of both translations of the interviews with Grandmaster Yip Man for New Martial Hero. So we have stuff like that on there, plus little gems and outtakes and special topics from the podcast, which you don't see anywhere else. So if you want to support us on Patreon, you can support us for as little as $5 a month. The link for that is here on the screen, and it's also below in the description. I'd really appreciate you guys supporting us there. And if you don't want to support us on Patreon, the easiest thing for you guys to do is to like this, share it. Don't forget to subscribe to the Kung Fu Genius and hit that bell for notifications. And I will see you guys next time.
Word is I'm a kung fu genius. Technique speaks for me, not lineage. Forget Jet Li, cause I'm the one. Many call me seafood, but to you I'm sea gung. And I produce masters. You surpassed us. Your kung fu stiffer than corpse and caskets. City Wing Chun is the house I built. Violate the gate and your blood gets spilt. Alex Richter, always the...
Especially our old Dudes of Kung Fu fans. I've said on a Patreon... I've said on...
I keep seeing ass.
And before we... Are you kidding me?
I didn't know that was going to.
Episode as opposed to this. Jesus Christ, Trey. Can't bring him anywhere.
All right, peeps. Okay, let's get the voice in.
And so it begins.
Oh, yes.
What's his dad? That's Barbara Streisand's.
Hey, don't take Barbara's name in vain in the studio, please.
I love it. Okay, peeps, on today's episode of the Kung Fu...
You didn't do anything.
What did I even do?
Now you're just blaming shit on everyone, all right?
Okay, peeps, on today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be discussing his time in prison.
We weren't going to talk about
All
that.
the prison
Hey, I
time.
told you, we're not talking about that.
All right, I didn't have the laugh out just yet.
Yeah, the helium of
Yes.
knowledge in his brain had already escaped.
The genius will be discussing his time training WT at the WB. All right, peeps, on today's episode of the... Come on, man. All right.
Yeah, calm your head space.
All right, peeps, on today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, I just spit across the table. All right, peeps, on today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be discussing his time training Wing Chun, not in Hong Kong, but at the The genius will be discussing his time training Wing Chun, not in Hong Kong, but at the castle. At a castle. The castle, but not in Hong Kong.
Yes, it was not the famous Hong Kong castle.
Time training Hong Kong Kung Fu, not at Hong Kong, but in a castle in Germany. Who knew?
No one knew.
All right, peeps, on today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be discussing his time training Hong Kong. You trained Hong Kong too? Lots of gems, lots of nonsense, lots of Fahrvergnügen. Let's get to it.
He turned his head the wrong way.
I know. All right, peeps, on today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be discussing his time training Hong Kong Wing Chun, but not in Hong Kong, but in a castle in Wing Chun and castles.
9 minutes in.
All right, peeps, on today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be discussing his... Cuckoo.
It's cuckoo.
All right, peeps, on today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be discussing his time training Wing Chun in, places. All right, peeps, on today's episode of the Kung Stop.
All of them?
Switch up the mic.
Christ.